How are you, Matt?
Me? Am I getting it? I'm doing well. You just heard Kat Beach talking a little bit about A1Cs. I want to talk to you, obviously, tonight about mindful eating. But before we do, can you tell everyone what an A1C is, who's listening, who might have diabetes, so they're aware of what that previous conversation was about?
Sure. So an A1C is a 3-month average that correlates to blood sugars. So when we test our blood sugars, we're only looking at a number, and that number isn't very stable, so it will change. So you might test your blood sugars 3 times in an hour, and if you ate anything, that blood sugar is going to go up and down. So when you check an A1C, you're looking at the average blood sugar, whether you're eating or you haven't eaten, while you're sleeping, while you're awake, while you're exercising. All of those numbers are kind of coming together, and they're getting averaged out. The American Diabetes Association sets a standard of 7 and below is considered good diabetes control, and the American College of Clinical Endocrinologists sets a standard of 6.5, and below is good diabetes control. Everyone's A1C and their target is established by you and your physician, and it's dependent on lots of other conditions. So if you don't know what your target A1C is, definitely talk with your healthcare provider to learn what yours is. Again, the 2 standards that we talked about, 7 and below, 6.5 and below, are good diabetes care. A person without diabetes would have an A1C of less than 5.7. So as Kat was talking, and she was mentioning numbers like 5.2, that person had moved from an A1C to a non-diabetic A1C range. Now the question that comes up in a lot of people's mind is, does that mean that they're cured? Does that mean they don't have diabetes? And of course, what would we say? We'd say, if you keep up the behaviors that help your body, you're managing your diabetes with those behaviors. So exercise, food, medication, monitoring, stress management, all of those things were the tools that allowed that A1C to go back. But if you stop using those tools, that blood sugar is going to creep back right back up again, because there is no cure for diabetes. And that's sad for people, but the cure is doing these healthy behaviors, learning, talking with people, getting the coach, taking a walk, doing exercise, those kinds of things. Those are the things that you do for the rest of your life that help you stay healthy. And it's not just people with diabetes, everybody, whether you have high blood sugars or not, needs to sing and dance in the kitchen and unwind and talk to their friends and eat good food and walk and exercise and see the doctor too, right?
Absolutely, and I appreciate you saying that, because I think it's so important for people to hear that message about, lowering your A1C is amazing, but knowing what that means and that you need to maintain it, and going back to the discipline and determination, like Kat said, as well as some of her patients. My question around that whole aspect was really about getting into this whole concept of, back to the initial conversation around food addiction, binge eating, and overeating, and people who, let's say they lost the weight, like we're saying, and they drop their A1C, and then they begin to let those habits creep back in that might have, weren't working for them to begin with, and suddenly their numbers start creeping up there, and they, some of these things about the binge eating and overeating, like Kat said, the starving to get down to a number or whatever, backfires, and they find themselves in this cycle. Is that what the Center of Mindful Eating is dealing with when you're working with patients with diabetes, is changing the relationship with food they have?
Well, you asked a lot of questions, so let me just kind of break it down. First of all, I know. So the Center for Mindful Eating is an international nonprofit, and it created the principles of mindful eating, which is taking mindfulness and applying it to food eating. So we know that when people practice mindfulness, and we're seeing lots and lots of studies come out saying it changes the brain, it makes people happier, lower stress, it can be used in things like psoriasis and eczema as really showing improvement. But what we're seeing is that mindfulness, when we apply to food and eating, are helping people disconnect from habitual patterns around food with binge eating, and also to change their coping mechanisms. So when we're happy or sad, we cope with that. We cope with all emotions, good or bad, and how we cope with them. Some people use food. So mindfulness and awareness, the same techniques that help people with PTSD move past that traumatic experience, also work with food and eating, and that's really, really exciting.
When you work with patients with type 2, do you see a link between any of these ideas and diabetes and why it might be a struggle for some people with diabetes, specifically type 2 diabetes, to lower their A1Cs because of this whole coping mechanism they might be using in their life might not be the best choice for them?
Well, I wrote a book with Dr. Michelle May called Eat What You Love, Love What You Eat with Diabetes, and Dr. May has created called Mindful Eating Cycle. It really talks about the cycle or patterns that we have around food and eating. I don't like to use the word addicted. I like to use the word hooked. And when we think about it, everybody gets hooked by food because it's a sensory trigger. Food looks good, it smells good, it tastes good, it feels good, it makes us happy. And there's lots of chemicals that are released when we eat, when we talk with people, when we connect with people, when we serve food to other people. There's lots of habits and culture, and there's just lots of stuff going there. It's a very complex process. So if we can do something really radical, and that's ask ourselves, why am I eating? Am I eating because I'm physically hungry, or am I eating for another reason? There's no wrong answer here. But just understanding why. Why am I eating? That is a question that it is actually the most radical thing you can do. Because once you understand why you're eating, you can decide what to eat, when to eat, how much to eat. You can really start kind of understanding that cycle. And that's what the mindful eating cycle is about. 6 questions that help people understand the why. Why am I eating? What's driving this food and eating habit? We get into a cycle, we get into a mindset, we get hooked by food, and it becomes familiar. Now, once something becomes familiar, we think it's right. We know it. I know this. This is familiar. It doesn't mean it's healthy. And so mindful eating is gently turning around saying, mindfulness is gently turning around saying, did it work? Did it really make you feel better? Did it really help you? Is it really the choice that's helping your health? It's asking this kind of gentle tweak, this little probe, this little poke. So I think what Kat said, when she says it gets into your head. That's what we're trying to do. Every single patient that I see, every person that I talk with, they're bright and able. Everybody starts in that state. If you're bright and able and you're struggling, maybe really the problem is you're having a hard time focusing in on changing your food and eating because you're dealing with all these other things. I call them alligators. Everybody's juggling alligators. So some alligators take a priority in our food and our eating, our health. That shifts. And we do that once, okay? We do it twice, yeah? We start getting in the pattern of letting food and eating and nutrition and health not be the priority because we have all these other alligators that we're dealing with. Then we start seeing patterns. And it's hard to kind of talk to that alligator that was pushed off to the side. He might have gotten kind of big. Might have been scary, not very familiar.
I feel like I hear a lot of people with diabetes talk about how they don't want to think about food. They feel like they have to fixate on it because of their diabetes, and it is the one alligator that they just kind of want to let go. You know, they think it's too much work to be a mindful eater. And I'm just curious, what do you think of that?
Well, one of the curious things about mindful eating is it is hard in the beginning. It does take some effort, and I think Kat really said you got to get that mindset, you got to get that determination. The thing is that in the beginning it's hard, but it gets easier every time you do it. So for the first week it's hard, the second week it's a little bit easier, third week a little bit easier. People say to me, after 6 months, they don't even think about it anymore. They're so good at starting to ask these questions. They're so good at checking in. Hey, am I hungry? How hungry am I? What do I really want? What do I really need? What do I really have? They start asking questions, and they get in the habit of asking questions, of exploring and understanding their own self, and saying it gets to be different every time. And that's exciting because you are in charge of your diabetes care. Who's the best person to be in charge? You. So you know your body, it's your body. Start asking questions, start learning about it. It's not an arduous task, it's curiosity. How do you get to know a friend? How do you become a friend? You ask questions, you care about them. The same thing with mindful eating. It's not turning around and saying you have to do this or you've got to do that. Saying, hey, what's going on? What do you need? How can I help? It's bringing that kindness back in, that self-kindness back into the conversation.
To yourself and everyone else. I think that's so important, what you're saying about just kind of being kind all the way around. This whole concept of who you are, being able to be kind enough to ask questions to your doctor, to consult with experts like yourself or Dr. Shemek who's coming up, to find what, to check out resources and bring them back to qualified people to begin to understand how to manage your diabetes and, like you said, how to juggle those alligators or maybe drop an alligator and just get rid of it, right?
I love that. That is perfect. I tell people all the time, we got to figure out how to set these alligators free. We don't need them
Exactly. All right, well, now, we're in the middle of celebrating 31 days of counting carbs at Divabetic, and we're focusing on fruits and vegetables, nature's candy, because we all know at the end of the month what's coming up, a big holiday that doesn't really focus on nature's candy, that focuses on another candy. So I have been working with my team, and we've been posting these numbers every day on Facebook, and I got an email back that I wanted to read to you and then get your answer on it as a registered dietitian, certified diabetes educator. This woman said, my sister is a diabetic and has never heard of counting carbs to manage blood sugars. I also asked a nutritionist who counsels diabetics, and she does not recommend this either. I believe that diet should be viewed as a whole, not a part. Counting carbs does no good if there's not a sufficient protein and fat in the diet. There are too many overweight people because of failure to look at the entire diet. Now the fad is to focus on carbs. They are neither bad nor good. They simply are. First of all, I never say diabetic. We say diabetic. And second of all, I'm reading it verbatim, so I'm not going to say the person's name, but the first part really stood out to me, that her sister has diabetes and she's never heard of carb counting to manage her blood sugars. As a certified diabetes educator, I'd love to get your response to that.
Again, carb counting is the standard that we use in the United States, so that's interesting. So again, I'm not really sure how to respond to that. I find that carbohydrates, being aware of carbohydrates, is really very helpful, and that most people, when they start doing awareness of carbohydrate and monitoring their blood sugars, they get a really good understanding of what's driving their blood sugars up or what's making them drop down. So that's really, really helpful for people. I do love the idea of eating a whole diet. So I always think to myself that when I eat carbohydrates in isolation, my blood sugars are going to behave differently than if I eat them with a healthy fat and protein, if I eat them with high fiber foods. So that's also really an important conversation to have. Carbohydrates do have the single greatest effect on your blood sugars, and awareness of carbohydrates in the diet is actually very, very helpful for blood glucose management.
Yes, and we're posting it because a lot of people don't know where to begin in this whole concept of counting carbs, especially if they don't come in packages. And the idea of a fruit or vegetable, you look at an apple, are you thinking carbs? You could turn over an Oreo package and see the carbs immediately. But the apple might, we do love to encourage people to eat fruits and vegetables, and like you said, have like both you and our Facebook friend said, we want people to have a well-balanced diet. But the truth is, this is part of being mindful, right? Kind of planning ahead, sitting down, thinking about what are you going to eat, and actually beginning, like you're saying, to watch how the patterns are creating around your blood sugars.
Absolutely, and that curiosity, again, really getting into the heart of it. When we test our blood sugars, we can really learn a lot about ourselves. And I had a patient who had a high blood sugar, and I said, what would you eat? He said, Raisin Bran. I said, what'd you learn? He goes, Raisin Bran jacks my blood sugar. So then I looked at another blood sugar, and I said, what'd you have? He goes, oh, you won't believe it. I said, well, what was it? He goes, oh, and he's listing off, like, alcohol and, cookies and all this other stuff, and his blood sugar was lower. And I said, wow, what do you think about that? And he goes, Raisin Bran has more effect on my blood sugars than beer and wine and cookies. I'm like, wow, they don't teach me that in diabetes school. So there's no possible way I can know how any individual person is going to react to their food and eating. And that's this idea of just turning around and saying, there isn't one solution. There isn't one outcome. It's your body. It's your life. It's your choices. Really start taking ownership, and that's the piece when we